Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian Fromhertz, Tribeca Trade Group, with your weekly video on themes and option flow. This is a weekly recap for the week ending 4/8/16, so April 8th, 2016. And I'll start with the S&P chart before we go into anything else. We've had this great move up from February 11th, where we put in a short-term low, and we've had a 14% climb since then. And last week, the S&P did some price digestion, some consolidation. We were down 1.2% for the week, and it looks like the rally is a little bit tired. So a couple levels that I'm watching here as we've kind of gone sideways now for the last week and a half is on the upside in S&P futures. I'm looking at 2065 as short-term resistance. And for support, I'm looking at right now 2032.75. So call it 2033 for short-term support. So what I normally look at, so I'm neutral right now. I'm waiting for either a move higher or a move lower, and until that happens, I'm neutral at the S&P. So what I normally look for is for a couple different themes that kind of provide clues to what the next direction in the market is going to be. So I'm going to walk through a couple of those themes, which also blend together with option activity from what we saw last week. So I'm going to start with the first thing that happened a couple weeks ago. We saw a ton of option plays, bullish plays in the biotech sector. We saw XBI calls go up a couple different times. We saw a big chunky order in IBB. That's the other biotech ETF. And then also we saw an order in XLV, which happened in the beginning of last week as well. Here is the order in XLV. This is going out to September. An interesting trade, 20,000 contracts traded, September 72 calls. But I was in both XBI and IBB, which I talked about in last week's video, and I just wanted to kind of recap that. First of all, so I hit targets in both of those trades, and I no longer have any exposure. Here is the last upside target. This was a Virgin point of control where a lot of the buying and selling pressure was consolidated around from a previous time frame. This was the 285 level, or excuse me, 286 level in IBB. We did hit that level, and that was a level that I sold my last piece of calls. So I'm no longer in that trade that I had talked about last week. And so moving on to this week, a couple of sectors that I find particularly interesting are the transports. Transports are one of the weakest. We're one of the weakest groups in 2015. They provided some signals that that the overall market might be getting weak. So what we've seen here in the last 2 months is a nice rally up in transports. However, we have started to move. If I go to the weekly chart, we did get into the weekly value area, and we also hit this downward trend line, which is the red line on my charts. And it looks like we failed here. The price action rejected this level, and just more recently, we actually just rejected the bottom of value. So the level that I'm watching at in the transports ETF, the IYT ETF, is right around 139. If we cannot reclaim that value or that particular price, I think we may have some downside to go. And then in option flow, I found this particularly interesting this week. This was back on the 7th. We saw a lot of activity in the rails, and this was on the bullish side. We saw NSC calls go up. We saw KSU calls go up. We saw CSX. This was all relatively within an hour or two. All roughly under $1 million of premium, but nonetheless, I thought this trade was interesting. I did play this as NSC trade to the long side. I believe I hit 3 targets in this one. I'm still holding a small piece in this one, considering it's a May 85 call position. So that's one trade that I still have a residual position in, and I did find the activity in the rails in options very interesting. The next area that I saw was particularly interesting and theme that I'd like to discuss is in retail. The same day, we saw a lot of put buying. The biggest trade was in Ross Stores, May 55 puts. This was $1.8 million in premium, so sizable trade. We also saw activity in Urban Outfitters, Best Buy, and Macy's. Earlier in the week, we saw a big order in Gap. This looks like it had some implications in terms of their same-store sales, which were atrocious. The stock fell after that put activity happened. But I also noticed the weakness in the overall sector in retail last week. So let's go ahead and bring up that chart in XRT. XRT is the equally weighted retail sector. And you can see on the weekly chart, first of all, let's go to the daily chart, and then we'll go back to the weekly chart. But another sector that's had a very nice run up since the February low and had some nice relative strength. However, it's gotten to a bit of trouble and has gone all the way through the value area from the red line to the yellow line to the green line. And it looks like we have went all the way through to the bottom of value. So could be a telltale sign for the market, as this area has done very well. And on the weekly chart, you can kind of see the same thing. We also just got into the bottom of the value area and has rejected it. So this is interesting as well, because it's not a small weight in the S&P. It's an over 10% weight in the S&P, so it could really start to affect things. Another sector that I found particularly weak last week was the regional banks. Let's start with the European financials first. They have been pretty weak. This was a fear that was taking place back in the end of 2015 and the beginning of the year. And we saw the European Financials ETF, which is EUFN. This has names like Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse in it, make a low of 1585 back on that February 11th date. And it's had a nice little rally, but it has definitely stalled out here, and it looks like it's going towards the back to the February 11th low. So something to keep an eye on there. And just like they did back in the end of 2015, our banks are starting to do the same thing here. Looks like they're starting to roll over a bit. The banks were one of the last areas to catch a bid, but they really didn't go too far and move sideways for about a month, and now look like they're starting to break down here. So that's the other area to keep an eye on, especially as we are kicking off earnings on Monday with Alcoa that reports after the close. And then you also have your big banks start to report, excuse me. That's JP Morgan. BlackRock also reports, Wells Fargo. I think Goldman's also in the mix as well. So something to keep an eye on. And then finally, the last chart I'm going to bring up is copper, another area that's showing weakness. Just like many of the other areas in the market and commodities, it's had a run up here the last couple months, but it definitely stalled out here. We see a shooting star that happened on March 18th that acted as a short-term high, and since then we've really been selling off. It basically went from overbought here on the RSI indicator all the way down to about a 31, which is where we are now. And if you look at the move in what happened in the last towards the end of the last week in oil, oil rebounded nicely. It'll be interesting to see if copper can do the same. It did not make that move that oil did on Friday. It only retraced a little bit of Thursday's move, so pretty weak. And we also hit this target. I also had a downside target here in copper, which it looks like we have taken out. So it'll be interesting to see what we do here next. Why I think it's important to watch copper is because it's another one of those gauges of the economy. So something to keep an eye on next week. All right, so that's the end of the weekly recap video. Please follow us at TribecaTradeGroup.com. We are offering specials on a couple different products. You can get involved in our trading room, and you can be a part of trading as it occurs. Or you can also, we also have another package that where you can see real-time trade alerts via text. And you can also be a part of our newsletter program. So that's it for the weekly recap. Have a great week.